Garrigan's road to the Dome continues with a 50-15 win over North Union and head on to play Don Bosco this Thursday at Conway Field. Welcome back to BG Game Preview. I'm your host, Lucy Eisenbarth, and Garrigan made it through another round of the 8-man playoffs. They have a quarterfinal matchup this week. Before we get into it and breaking down every stat line, we're going to recap rewind on Garrigan's 50-15 win versus North Union. Before we do that, make sure to like, subscribe, comment down below your predictions or anything else like that. Go follow BG Game Preview on Instagram to never miss another upload and to go catch some 3 and 30 content. Also be posting that on here. And I do apologize, I haven't been able to get 3 and 30 out the past 2 weeks. I'm going to try to this week for sure. Without further ado, let's get right into it. Starting off with Garrigan's 50-15 win versus North Union. Garrigan went up really early in this game, like we've seen from past games from Garrigan, going up 23-2-0 after the first half, and then going up 30-7 at halftime. Garrigan would go on to score 14 in the third quarter and 6 in the fourth quarter, with letting up a touchdown in the fourth quarter as well, giving them their 50-15 win. Leading the stat line side things for Garrigan, senior quarterback Tate First completed 4 of his 9 passes for 60 yards and 0 touchdowns, while rushing for 106 yards and 2 touchdowns. Leading rusher for Garrigan was senior Ethan Marceau with 23 attempts for 165 yards and 2 touchdowns last Friday night. Leading receiver was Weston Rosemeyer Jr. with 1 catch for 24 yards and 0 touchdowns. And leading the defensive side of the ball for Garrigan was Ethan Marceau with 4.5 tackles, 2 TFLs, and 2 sacks. Overall, Garrigan as a team had 50 rushing attempts for 362 yards, so this game was mainly dominated on the ground, and 7 rushing touchdowns. Leading over to the defensive side of the ball, Garrigan had 24 solo tackles, 35.5 total tackles, 6 sacks, and 8 tackles for loss. They had 1 fumble recovery and 1 interception on the night as well. This and holding North Union to only 15 points was a pretty good performance for this Garrigan defense. Looking over at North Union's side of the stat line, junior Grayson Colgrove completed 5 of his 11 passes for 74 yards and 1 touchdown. He also led the rushing with 7 attempts for 41 yards and 0 touchdowns. Leading receiver for the Warriors was Cale Jones with 3 receptions for 44 yards and 0 touchdowns. And then leading the defensive side for North Union was Cale Jones again with 8 tackles. Looking at this Warrior offense, they had 26 rushing attempts for 87 rushing yards and 1 rushing touchdown on the night. And finally, North Union's defensive side of the ball, they had 47 total tackles, 31 solo tackles, 2 tackles for loss, and 0 sacks. No fumble recoveries, and no interceptions either. This game for Garrigan, like I had said earlier, was mainly dominated on the ground. That is Garrigan's offensive scheme is their rushing. That's what we have hit a lot, especially last year when you had Trayden Sink and Ethan Marceau. Ethan Marceau stepped up and took that role a lot this year and has become the number 1 person in this offense. You also see Tate First. Tate First has a great ability to scramble out of the pocket and even just take it for a QB draw up the middle. We've seen a lot of runs from Tate First where he will just go all the way for a touchdown. He can get through the defense. His offensive line gives him a nice gap, and he can just go all the way. The stat line that I always think is interesting is looking at Garrigan's leading receiver for the week, because Garrigan doesn't throw the ball very much. When they do, it is usually to a ton of different guys, so the leading receiver changes every week, which is kind of cool to see because you're always talking about someone new. Overall, just a good game from Garrigan. North Union struggled on offense. They kind of struggled in all aspects of passing and rushing, as you see from their rushing stat lines with the 26 attempts for 87 yards. They only averaged 3.3 yards a carry, and then if you compare that to Garrigan's 7.2, that's a huge difference in offensive yards per carry. They couldn't really get it going in the air either, which is not shocking from this Garrigan defense, as we've seen that they can have a good secondary. Garrigan secondary is something that we should be watching in future games if we play some of these other bigger 8-man schools, as they do tend to pass the ball more than running. Running in 8-man is a very common strategy. It's a very different game than 11-man, which is something that not a lot of people realize. It's one of the quirks and unique things that makes 8-man what it is. Overall, final notes on this game. Garrigan's defense did a very good job handling. Garrigan's offense worked its course, and they will move on to play Don Bosco in this week's quarterfinal matchup, and North Union's season will come to a close. Now that we've finished the recap rewind, let's head over and look at Garrigan's quarterfinal matchup for this Thursday. Garrigan's opponent for this Thursday night will be the Don Bosco Dons, who have made it to the quarterfinals. We're going to hit a recap on their season so far to see how they got to this point. Don Bosco enters this game at 7-2 with a loss 39-49 versus Iowa Valley, a win versus West Central 74-0, a win 61-0 versus Janesville, a canceled game versus Dunkerton, who canceled their season, I believe, a loss 42-27 versus Gladbrook-Rhinebeck on Don Bosco's homecoming, a win 47-30 versus Turkey Valley, a win 55-7 on Don Bosco's senior night versus Cedar Ridge Christian, a win 55-6 at Tripoli, a win 54-10 versus Collins Maxwell in the first round of playoffs, and a win 69-32 versus Clarksville in the second round last week. Looking over at Don Bosco's team stats to get a feel for their game, senior quarterback Tucker Youngblood has completed 56 of his 92 passes for 1,122 yards and 20 touchdowns on the year, while rushing for 683 yards and 9 touchdowns. Leading rusher for the Dons is Ty Christensen, a senior, with 106 carries for 882 yards and 20 touchdowns, also receiving for 404 yards and 7 touchdowns so far. He is their leading receiver as well as their leading rusher. Then on the defensive side of the ball for the Dons is Kaiser Boivy, a senior with 45.5 tackles, 16 TFLs, 4 sacks, and 1 fumble recovery so far this year. Looking at overall team stats, they do have 282 rushing attempts for 2,359 yards, averaging 8.4 rushing yards per carry, and 45 rushing touchdowns so far this season. Yards, they have 59 receptions for 1,177 yards and 20 receiving touchdowns as well. Looking over to the defensive side of Don Bosco's game, they have 352.5 total tackles, 198 solo tackles, 56 tackles for loss, 11 sacks, 7 forced fumbles with 4 fumble recoveries, and 7 interceptions so far this year. Overall, for being a 7-2 team, which granted those 2 losses do come from very highly ranked teams, Gladbrook-Rhinebeck being number 2 and Iowa Valley being number 3. Especially out of the chute, playing a team like Iowa Valley is a very tough opponent. This team on paper is a really, really good looking team. While rushing seems to be their main factor, they also pass the ball very well. You see that from Ty Christensen. He has almost 1,000 rushing yards, and he also has 400 receiving yards. He seems to do both very well and is a key player going into this game for the Don Bosco Dons. Their quarterback Tucker Youngblood seems to be able to roll out of the pocket pretty well and find a way into the end zone on the ground. Comparing his completions to his attempts, he seems to be pretty accurate and seems to be able to hit the wide receivers pretty well. He does make a couple mistakes, as he does have 5 passing interceptions on the year, which still is a pretty low margin compared to how many touchdowns he's thrown and how many big offensive plays it seems that he can make. This team looks to be really good and is going to be a very tough opponent for Garrigan. Garrigan up to this point hasn't played a whole lot of competition. You've had teams like Kingsley Pearson who are actually pretty good, and you've had this second North Union team, I say second because we had played them earlier in the season, who looked better than they did in week 6, I believe. St. Ned's, who was another opponent that made the playoffs, and there were some other teams that Garrigan played that were pretty decent and had some potential. Overall, I do think that this is Garrigan's hardest opponent of the year, and it is even harder because it is playoffs. Anything can happen in playoffs, and you want to stay more conservative with some of these games. Garrigan's key factors in this game is just overcoming this Don Bosco defense, which I do believe is very, very possible from this Garrigan offense. We've seen how this offense works, and we've seen how dominant they can be on the ground, in the run, and how dominant they can even be in the air. Something they don't do a lot, but Tate Furch passing the ball is still a really good weapon that honestly might get utilized more in playoffs and at the Dome, as teams that scout Garrigan will see that they are a huge rushing offense. They see a player like Ethan Marceau and they'll lock down on him, and that will be their main for the game, is to stop Ethan Marceau. It is a very hard thing to do, as he is a freak athlete and he is a really good player, Getting around the Garrigan offensive line also is a very hard thing to do. The offensive line just goes to work and can make a gap for anybody, whether it is Tate Furch or Ethan Marceau, whoever is running the ball. Containing Tate Furch is another thing that teams will look at, which will force Tate to throw the ball more. Keys on defense for some of these teams that Garrigan will play in the playoffs will change too, as that secondary will need to lock down a little bit more, as they might take a chance with passing the ball rather than running it, because that is what the Garrigan defense will be ready for, is the run. That's what most defenses are ready for in 8-man, as like I said earlier, rushing in 8-man is just such a prominent thing. It is the backbone of 8-man football. You also look at teams like Woodbine that throw more than they run. I'm using them as an example because they do have a really high-functioning passing offense compared to their rushing offense. They still run the ball very well, but passing is their biggest weapon. Overall, this will be a very good game for Garrigan. It'll kind of test the waters and see maybe a little bit of what we could see at the Dome. What's hard about playoffs and 8-man football in general is there are just so many good teams. Every team left in the playoffs has a shot at making the Dome. Every game this week should be a good game, as you are fighting for a spot to go to the Dome next week. Don Bosco's key plays to the game will be shutting down the run, like I said earlier, forcing Tate to throw the ball more, and then also just making sure that your secondary is tight and make sure that the secondary can stop the pass for when it comes. Garrigan likes to hit teams unexpectedly with the pass when they're not ready for it, and that leads to huge plays and big touchdowns. Don Bosco also does just need to kind of keep their cool when going into Conway Field. They almost need to just relax, and they need to get their offense working and get the chains moving on the field. With that, I think Garrigan's keys to success will be completed while Don Bosco's may not. Don Bosco may be able to keep the secondary together but not stop the run, or they might be able to stop the run but not keep the secondary together. Either way, I do think that there will be something that leads Don Bosco to lose this game, and it will be the little mistakes that they regret in the end. Garrigan will come out with the win. My final score prediction for this game is Garrigan 48, Don Bosco 27. I do think that Don Bosco's offense will be able to put up some points versus Garrigan defense from the receiving side of things, as they'll be able to catch Garrigan's secondary off guard, and they will be able to make some big plays and get some nice scores. Overall, I do think that this Garrigan defense will be able to hold them to a minimum and get their offense moving as well, like they always do. I do think that this will be Garrigan's closest game of the season as well, just because it is playoffs and you are playing your toughest opponent so far this season. I think as we approach the championship game and as we approach the Dome in general, every game that Garrigan will play will get to a closer margin and a closer margin. You saw this last year. You see this usually, and we saw it especially 2 years ago when Garrigan won the championship. Every winning margin got smaller and smaller and smaller as they went on, and I do believe that they won the championship by 9 points in the end. The week before it was 14, and I think the week before that it was maybe 20 something. I could be wrong on that. I don't remember the scores off the top of my head, but it is just something you see as you play tougher and tougher opponents as you go through the playoffs. With that, Garrigan will advance to, if I am correct, Garrigan will advance to the Dome, going 11-0 in the regular season and undefeated at home, and they will send the Don Bosco Dons home. It should be a great game. It will be played Thursday, November 6th at 7 o'clock at Garrigan. There will be a lot of great games to tune into and watch this week. We're going to cover some of those right now. Like I said in the last clip, there are a lot of great 8-man matchups this week for the quarterfinals. We're going to cover some of them now, and I'll give you my predictions and who I think will be making the Dome. Obviously, like I talked about, we have Don Bosco versus Garrigan this week. Following them, we have Edgewood Colesburg versus Gladbrook Rhinebeck. Audubon and Iowa Valley will be duking it out, and Fairmont Hills and Woodbine is our final matchup for the quarterfinals. Winner of these games will go on to play at the Dome next week or 2 weeks from now. I do not know. I do think it is next week, though. Overall, every team that is in the quarterfinals right now has a shot at making the Dome and potentially winning the championship. These are all great teams on paper. I did look at some of them over the weekend. I will not go over stat lines for every single one because this video would be 3 hours long. I will give my predictions, though, and who I think will be making the Dome. First of all, looking at Gladbach-Rheinbeck versus Edgewood-Colesburg. I think that Gladbach-Rheinbeck will make the Dome and they will take this game. Edgewood-Colesburg is a very good team on paper, but Gladbach-Rheinbeck has just been a powerhouse like Garrigan. They've been number 2 for a while in the 8-man polls, and they entered the playoffs at number 2. Last year, making the championship and falling to Remsen St. Mary's, they are back for revenge, and they want to win that championship this year. I think they will be a very, very tough team, and they are going to make an appearance at the Dome this year. Looking next at Audubon versus Iowa Valley. Iowa Valley is ranked number 3 or 4, I believe, on the polls. I believe it is number 3, and Woodbine falls at the number 4 spot. Audubon is a very good team. I don't think a lot of people thought they would be this good going into this year, and here they are in the quarterfinals. Iowa Valley is a really tough team, as I had mentioned earlier, beating teams that are really good like Don Bosco. Iowa Valley is another team that has been traditionally good and has a really great shot at making the Dome. Audubon, again, as well, has a really good shot at making the Dome, but I do believe that Iowa Valley will just be able to outscore them and just outweigh them in general. Iowa Valley is going to make an appearance at the Dome this year. Final game will be Fairmont Mills versus Woodbine. Woodbine I talked about earlier, as they just have a great passing offense. They have been a traditionally good team in 8-man, but have not been able to get it done. I hate that my score predictions and my predictions are just very general, as it is the 1, 2, 3, and 4 all making the Dome this year. But when you have teams like Garrigan, Gladbrook, Iowa Valley, and Woodbine, these are 4 very traditional teams that have been good in almost every conference that you put them in. So at Garrigan, when they played 1A and when they played A, were decent in both those classes. Gladbach-Rheinbeck has been very good in their respective class for multiple years. Iowa Valley and Woodbine I know less about, but I do think that they have been decent. There are 4 very well-coached, very traditional football teams that just have been very good. With that, Woodbine will be making an appearance at the Dome this year, and I do believe that they will win this game versus Fairmont Mills. While I do love an underdog story, out of the 4 teams that I chose to lose, I do think that Audubon has the highest chance of making the Dome. I think Audubon, out of Edgewood, Colesburg, Fairmont Mills, and Don Bosco, has the best team and has a chance to beat Iowa Valley. That will be the closest game of the week, with Gladbrook and Edgewood being the highest scoring margin. I do think that Gladbrook will go into that game and kind of beat up on Edgewood a little bit. Obviously not too much, as it is playoffs, and you still want to stay conservative with your predictions as someone who makes them, because it is playoffs and anything could happen. Fairmont Mills is a good team, but I do not believe that they will be able to overcome that Woodbine passing offense like I had mentioned earlier. Taking my predictions into a bracket, let's see who Garrigan would play. So, looking at overall seeding and record, I do believe that Garrigan would play Woodbine in the first round, with Gladbach-Rheinbeck playing Iowa Valley. I do think that's how it would fall, as Garrigan's the 1 seed and Woodbine is the 4. So the 2 would play the 3, which gives you Gladbrook and Iowa Valley. That would be a really, really tough game for Garrigan, but I do think that they would be able to beat Woodbine. Woodbine also has an equally high chance of beating Garrigan. It really depends on Garrigan's secondary strength. If Garrigan's secondary can lock down and can beat that Woodbine offense, then Garrigan is going to make the championship. That is the huge key factor going into that game, is the secondary. That will determine everything else that happens in that game and the fluidity of everything else. Garrigan's defense is going to have to give Garrigan's offense a lot of opportunity to score. They're going to have to give them many chances and many touches on the ball to run up the score and not let up a lot of points versus Woodbine, if this is the case and we do go on to play them. Gladbrook and Iowa Valley would also be a really good game. You would have to look at Gladbrook's offense and Iowa Valley's really good defense, and you would have to determine that from there. Gladbrook, again, like Garrigan, is kind of a powerhouse in the 8-man conference, and they have been for a couple years. I do believe that they've been to the Dome every single year that Garrigan has, starting from, I believe, 2023 to 24 season and up to now, which would be 3 years. Overall, this 8-man season is going to be very fun. It's going to be very fun to predict and to see some of these final scores for some of these teams. There is not a bad team left in the playoffs, like I said earlier, and it'll be very interesting to see if there's any upsets this week and any different faces that I wouldn't think I'd be seeing at the Dome. Something that I do like to say is nothing is impossible, everything is probable. That is definitely the case with high school football, as we've seen some big shockers before. With that, this is going to be very fun to cover, and I will be giving you all of the best predictions and all of the best stat line breakdowns over the course of the rest of the playoffs. Before I end off this video, I wanted to give a shout out to some of the sports I have seen accomplishments and success in the past couple weeks. Two in specific that I want to shout out. Starting off with cross-country runner Julia Swift on her top 15 finish at the state cross-country meet. She finished 13th. I do not know the times. I am very sorry. I do not know where to find times, like I have said in past videos. Congrats to Julia, and a great end of the season for her. My final shout out I want to give to the state competition cheer team for their first place win in Class 1A last Saturday as well. Garrigan finished first in their competition routine and brought home the state title for the second year in a row. Congratulations to them for going back-to-back, and a great end of the season for them as well. Without further ado, that is the end of this video. Make sure to like, subscribe, comment down below anything you want me to see, or if you disagree with my prediction. I'd love to hear yours in the comments if you have any. Go follow BG Game Preview on Instagram to catch 3 and 30, and also to never miss another upload. BG Game Preview will be covering the playoffs all season long before basketball starts this winter. Without further ado, this is Lucy Eisenbarth signing off on BG Game Preview.